Emma stood at the edge of the dog show arena, clutching the leash of her German Shepherd, Max. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the judgment hanging in the air. A soft breeze ruffled her unkempt hair as she looked around, noticing the polished outfits of the other kids. Some were wearing matching jackets with embroidered names and sponsors. Their dogs gleamed in the sunlight, their coats perfectly combed and shining. They looked like they belonged in the spotlight. Emma, on the other hand, didn't have any of that. Her clothes were plain, just a faded purple t-shirt, some well-worn jeans, and sneakers that were a size too big. Her fingers nervously twisted the leash as she tried to steady her breath. Max, her German Shepherd, was an old soul. His fur was thick, but uneven in patches, his coat a mix of golden browns and creams. He wasn't the most refined dog at the event, and Emma knew it, but he was hers, and that was enough. Some of the other kids whispered to each other, their glances pointed in Emma's direction. The subtle snickers were hard to ignore. "What's she doing here?" One of them muttered. "Doesn't look like her dog's trained at all," another said. Emma's heart sank, but she didn't let her face show it. She could hear the laughter in the background, but she chose not to listen. Instead, she kept her focus on Max, who was standing by her side with a calmness that made her feel a little braver. Max was no show dog. He was a companion. He wasn't polished or perfect, but he had a heart bigger than any trophy. The bond between them wasn't built on commands and flashy performances. It was built on the quiet understanding they shared. Every day after school, Emma would come home and throw a ball for Max to fetch, not worrying about agility, just the joy of seeing him run. When Emma had trouble with math homework, Max would lie by her feet, keeping her company in the silence, offering comfort when she felt alone. Max was her friend, her family, and her protector. As the other competitors took their spots and began setting up their routines, Emma simply stood there, her eyes trained on Max. The world felt quieter when she was with him. She didn't need fancy clothes or expensive training to know that the two of them, together, could accomplish something incredible. The whispering, the stares, they didn't matter. She and Max had already won. The dog show had started in full swing. The judges were seated at their tables, taking notes as dogs performed their routines. The atmosphere was a mix of excitement and competition, and Emma couldn't help but feel small in the grand scheme of it all. She looked at the other participants and their polished dogs, their perfectly timed routines, and their perfectly tailored outfits. She felt out of place. Max, who had been standing quietly by her side, let out a soft whine, almost as if he could sense her discomfort. Emma bent down to scratch behind his ears, taking comfort in the familiar motion. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, her voice steady, but her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of others on her. Their glances were sharp, judgmental, and even a little cruel. "You think she's serious about this?" One of the older boys whispered to his friend. Emma wasn't close enough to hear everything, but she could see the way their lips curled into smiles that weren't kind. "Look at that dog. Looks like he just came off a farm," the boy added, barely trying to keep his voice down. Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment, and she quickly looked away. She refused to let them see how much their words stung. Instead, she focused on Max, who gave her a look of pure loyalty. She could feel his eyes on her, comforting her without needing to say a word. A few more whispers followed. The adults around her exchanged glances, some frowning, others shaking their heads. "Isn't she a little young for this?" one woman murmured. "And that dog," she added with a dismissive gesture. "You can tell she's not serious about the competition. Look at the state of him. They're not going to get far." Emma didn't look at anyone now. She kept her eyes firmly on the ground, her fingers wrapped around Max's leash. She knew what they were saying. She didn't need to hear it. But deep down, something stirred inside her, something fierce and unshakable. She had grown up with Max, spent countless hours with him, and knew that no amount of judging stares or whispered insults could take away the bond they shared. Maybe they didn't fit the mold of the other competitors, but she and Max had something the others didn't, something more important than perfect appearances or polished routines. Max nuzzled her hand gently, as though reminding her that he was all she needed. Emma took a deep breath, letting the anger and frustration slide off her shoulders. It didn't matter what the others thought. She and Max were about to prove something far more valuable than winning ribbons. Emma stood there, still feeling the weight of the whispers, but now something in her was different. The quiet, the judgment, the laughter, they didn't matter anymore. They had made her doubt herself for a moment, but Max was here, right by her side, and that was all that mattered. Max's fur, though uneven and a little matted, carried the scent of the woods they had often walked together. He was a reminder of simpler days, days filled with just the two of them, running through the fields and playing fetch under the warm sun. No routines, no pressures, just love. She looked down at him. His brown eyes met hers, soft and calm. There was a certain trust between them, a bond that no one could understand unless they had been there. Max didn't need the spotlight or the applause. He just wanted to be there for her, to make her feel safe, even when the world around her seemed a little overwhelming. Emma's hands, though slightly trembling, tightened around the leash. She took a deep breath and straightened up. She wasn't going to let anything get in the way of what she came here to do, not the snickers, not the sidelong glances. She had trained with Max. She had spent hours running through their routine over and over again until it felt as natural as breathing. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about doing something they loved together. Max, Emma whispered softly, as if the whole world had quieted, and it was just the two of them left. Max's ears perked up at the sound of his name, his head tilting slightly as he watched her with a look of understanding. Without missing a beat, he stood taller, his posture alert and ready, as though he sensed the shift in her confidence. The announcer's voice broke through the silence, calling their names. Next up, Emma and Max with the German Shepherd. The words felt different now, no longer like a taunt, but a call to action. Emma walked forward, Max at her side. The moment they stepped into the ring, she felt a wave of quiet strength wash over her. It wasn't the loud, boisterous confidence that you saw from the other competitors, but a quiet, steady confidence that was uniquely hers. She didn't need the fancy outfits or the perfect dog. She had Max, and that was enough. The audience, still distracted by the routines of the other contestants, didn't pay much attention at first, but Emma didn't care. She nodded at Max, and he responded, ready to do what they had practiced. Together, they would show everyone exactly what mattered. As the music began to play softly in the background, Emma and Max moved together, their every step in sync. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what happened next, she had already won. The soft hum of the music filled the air as Emma and Max stood motionless in the middle of the ring. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had slowed down. Emma's heart beat a little faster, but her hands remained steady. She looked at Max, his large, intelligent eyes locked onto hers, and she smiled. He was ready. Max, Emma said quietly, her voice steady, but filled with a quiet command. It was a simple word, just his name, but it held everything they had worked for in the past few months. It was the beginning of their routine, the key to everything they had practiced together. Max's ears perked up at the sound of his name, and the transformation was instant. The scruffy German shepherd, who had seemed so out of place just moments ago, now stood tall and alert, his focus completely on Emma. It wasn't just obedience, it was trust. Max knew exactly what to do. As if guided by an invisible force, Max moved. He navigated the cones with ease, weaving back and forth, his paws light on the ground, every movement sharp and precise. Emma followed him effortlessly, her steps matching his, a silent rhythm they had honed over weeks of practice in the backyard. The crowd, which had been murmuring and looking around, suddenly fell quiet. Emma and Max were no longer just a pair of underdogs. They were a team, a single fluid unit. Every command Emma gave was met with a perfect response. Max's movements were graceful, almost elegant, as if he was dancing. When Emma signaled for Max to jump over a small hurdle, he cleared it with perfect form, landing softly on the other side. The crowd gasped. For a moment, it felt like the world had held its breath. Emma's eyes were focused on Max, but she could feel the shift in the air around them. Something was happening, something that couldn't be ignored. As they reached the final part of their routine, Emma gave Max the hand signal to pause, and he froze in place, his body perfectly aligned. Emma took her time, walking slowly in front of him, her eyes never leaving his. They moved together in perfect harmony, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The connection between them was so strong that it seemed to transcend the routine itself. And then the final move came. With one last command, Emma signaled for Max to perform a spin and sit, and he did it flawlessly. There was no hesitation, no mistake. Just Max and Emma standing together in the center of the ring, their bond undeniable. The music ended, and the arena was silent for a moment. No one moved. Emma stood tall, proud, and a little breathless. She didn't need to hear applause to know what had just happened. She and Max had done it. The arena was still. Emma stood there, frozen for a split second, her heart pounding in her chest. Max, too, seemed to hold his breath, his body perfectly still as if they had stepped into a moment suspended in time. The music had faded away, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. Emma glanced around, her gaze shifting to the crowd. The spectators, who had once whispered and laughed, were now eerily quiet. Their eyes were wide with astonishment, fixed on her and Max. The snickers had stopped, replaced by a look of disbelief. Emma swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their gazes. Was it surprise? Amazement? Maybe a little guilt for the judgment they had passed before? The judges, too, had fallen silent. Their pens hovered in the air, their eyes darting from Emma to Max as if they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Even the other competitors, who had been so confident just moments ago, now looked at Emma and Max with an entirely new respect. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her and her dog to show up like this. So composed, so connected, so in sync. It felt like the world had stopped, and the only sound left was the rhythmic beating of Emma's heart and the soft, steady panting of Max beside her. Emma took a slow breath, her chest rising and falling. This wasn't just a competition. This was something more, something bigger than ribbons and trophies. This was a moment of realization. Then, as if on cue, the first applause broke out, slowly at first, unsure, but growing louder with every passing second. One judge began clapping, and then another. The crowd followed, their cheers swelling like a wave, loud and genuine. Emma's chest tightened with emotion as she realized what had just happened. This wasn't the applause of pity or sympathy. It was the applause of recognition. For a brief moment, Emma closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. She felt her shoulders relax, the tension that had built up throughout the day slipping away. It was as if a weight had been lifted. Max nudged her gently, his warm breath brushing against her hand, grounding her in the moment. When she opened her eyes again, she saw people standing, some with tears in their eyes, others clapping and whistling. The other competitors, who had once whispered and snickered, now looked at Emma with admiration. One boy, the same one who had mocked her earlier, gave a thumbs up. His expression changed from smug to genuinely impressed. Emma smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that came from winning. It was the smile of someone who had just discovered something important, not about the competition, but about herself and Max. They didn't need validation from anyone else. They had already proven what mattered most. The applause grew louder, but Emma barely noticed it anymore. She was still standing in the center of the ring, her breath steady, her heart racing, but all she could focus on was Max. The connection between them was so deep, so pure, that nothing else in the world seemed to matter. She had no need for the spotlight or for the approval of others. This was their moment, and it felt like everything had led to this point. The judges exchanged glances, their pens still in the air, their expressions unreadable. Emma could see them trying to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't like the other performances, all polished and perfect in their own way. No, this had been different. It was raw. It was real. And it had made an impact. But there was one more thing to do. Emma and Max had one final move in their routine, a move that would tie everything together, a move that would showcase the bond they shared. It wasn't flashy or complicated, but it was something they had practiced together over and over again. The last part of their performance wasn't about tricks or stunts. It was about trust. It was about proving that, together, they could do something no one else could. Emma looked down at Max, her fingers lightly brushing his fur. She nodded, giving him a signal, and he stood tall, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd, still clapping, fell into a softer rhythm, the anticipation building as they realized that something special was about to happen. Emma gave one final command, a subtle gesture with her hand, and Max moved into position. He started to spin slowly in a circle, his body graceful and fluid. As he completed the spin, he moved into a perfect sitting position, his back straight and his head held high. Max had done this routine countless times, but today there was something different in the way he did it. It was as if he understood the gravity of the moment. Max finished the move, his eyes still locked with Emma's. And then, as if to punctuate the routine, he bowed, gently, gracefully, a move so perfectly executed that the crowd gasped in awe. It was the most natural, heartfelt bow anyone had ever seen. It wasn't just a trick. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, the hours of training, the silent communication, the love and trust that existed between them. The arena exploded with applause, louder than before. Emma, overwhelmed with emotion, took a deep breath. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the crowd to react like this. But it wasn't about the applause. It was about the quiet pride that filled her chest, knowing that she and Max had just shared something extraordinary. They had shown the world what truly mattered, the strength of their bond. The applause grew louder, but Emma barely noticed it anymore. She was still standing in the center of the ring, her breath steady, her heart racing, but all she could focus on was Max. The connection between them was so deep, so pure, that nothing else in the world seemed to matter. She had no need for the spotlight or for the approval of others. This was their moment, and it felt like everything had led to this point. The judges exchanged glances, their pens still in the air, their expressions unreadable. Emma could see them trying to process what they had just witnessed. It wasn't like the other performances, all polished and perfect in their own way. No, this had been different. It was raw, it was real, and it had made an impact. But there was one more thing to do. Emma and Max had one final move in their routine, a move that would tie everything together, a move that would showcase the bond they shared. It wasn't flashy or complicated, but it was something they had practiced together over and over again. The last part of their performance wasn't about tricks or stunts. It was about trust. It was about proving that, together, they could do something no one else could. Emma looked down at Max, her fingers lightly brushing his fur. She nodded, giving him a signal, and he stood tall, his eyes never leaving hers. The crowd, still clapping, fell into a softer rhythm, the anticipation building as they realized that something special was about to happen. Emma gave one final command, a subtle gesture with her hand, and Max moved into position. He started to spin slowly in a circle, his body graceful and fluid. As he completed the spin, he moved into a perfect sitting position, his back straight and his head held high. Max had done this routine countless times, but today there was something different in the way he did it. It was as if he understood the gravity of the moment. Max finished the move, his eyes still locked with Emma's. And then, as if to punctuate the routine, he bowed, gently, gracefully, a move so perfectly executed that the crowd gasped in awe. It was the most natural, heartfelt bow anyone had ever seen. It wasn't just a trick. It was a symbol of everything they had built together. The hours of training, the silent communication, the love and trust that existed between them. The arena exploded with applause, louder than before. Emma, overwhelmed with emotion, took a deep breath. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected the crowd to react like this. But it wasn't about the applause. It was about the quiet pride that filled her chest, knowing that she and Max had just shared something extraordinary. They had shown the world what truly mattered, the strength of their bond. As Emma stood in the center of the arena, the weight of the heart of the show ribbon around her neck, she realized something important. This moment wasn't just a triumph for her and Max. It was a victory for their journey. They hadn't just performed a routine, they had shared a story. And that story, filled with quiet dedication, love, and trust, had spoken louder than any polished trick or perfectly choreographed performance. The applause still echoed in the background, but it felt like a distant hum. Emma felt the cool fabric of the ribbon against her skin, and she looked down at Max. He was standing proudly by her side, his tail wagging lazily, as if he knew deep down that they had done something special. Max didn't care about ribbons or trophies. He cared about Emma, and that was enough. As the crowd began to settle, Emma found herself surrounded by the other competitors. The boys and girls who had once looked at her with judgment now approached her, their expressions filled with respect. One by one, they'd offered words of congratulations. "You and Max were incredible," the boy who had laughed at her earlier said, his voice sincere. "I've never seen anything like it. You two have a real connection." Emma smiled softly, her cheeks still flushed from the emotions of the moment. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "Max is amazing. We've been working together for a long time." The others nodded and a few even patted Max on the head. It wasn't just the ribbon that had changed their perception of Emma and Max. It was the understanding that sometimes the most powerful connections are the quiet ones, the ones that don't need to be flashy or loud to be meaningful. The judges gathered, and the event began to wrap up, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning for her and Max. She had learned something that day, not just about dog shows or competitions, but about what truly matters in life. It wasn't about the recognition or the applause. It was about the bond she shared with her dog, the trust they had built, and the quiet strength that came from knowing they were a team. As she walked out of the arena, Max by her side, Emma looked up at the sky, the warm sun on her face. The future felt open, full of possibilities. She didn't need to win another ribbon to know that she and Max had already accomplished something far more important. They had proven to themselves and to the world that love, trust, and partnership were all they needed to shine. And with Max by her side, Emma knew that there was no challenge they couldn't face together.